Hi, everyone. Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. We have an exciting show. If you watch our shows back to back, you saw a replay with Anne Yurasek of Fio Partners last week. And guess what she was talking about? Strategic planning. Well, as you know, we're doing a board series, and instrumental to boards are strategic plans or the planning process for the future of an organization. And who other do we bring on than Anne Yurasek? She's back. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back for the next 30 minutes, and let's hear why board members are important to the strategic planning process.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Coffee Time with Masterminds. My name is Peter Blakely, and I'm the founder and principal of Blakely Consulting.
Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. I am Cynthia Rojas, founder and principal of To Your Growth.
Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. I'm Rebecca Tuttle, founder and principal of Grant Right Now and Grant Writing for Good.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. I am Cynthia Rojas, and I want to welcome our viewers throughout the U.S. and around the world, and our listeners in Australia. We have a great show, and I'm going to get started because it's going to be packed with great information. Joining me is Anne Yurasek from Fio Partners and my amazing co-host, Peter Blakely. Hey, guys, how are you?
Hi, good to see you.
Good to see you. I totally messed up that introduction. I have to tell our viewers the weird thing that when you are when you're doing a show, you look at this dot in your computer, and every once in a while, you're wondering, why am I staring at a dot? So I started thinking that and completely lost my train of thought. So I apologize for that.
It's sort of like when you spell the same word over and over, and it just becomes completely unfamiliar.
Yeah. Definitely. Like cinnamon. I don't know how to spell that word. I don't even know how to say it. Anne, welcome. How cool to see you.
Great to see you both. Very happy to be back here at Coffee Time with Masterminds. Really excited to continue the conversation.
Oh my God. Yes. The last time we spoke was in October of 2022. And you were telling us why strategic planning is so important. But there is something that I want to say, because we do have some listeners. They are in Australia and they don't see the show, but you have this wonderful background vibe going on where you have darkened your background and all we see is your face that's perfectly lit up.
Just and a little bit of office clutter that no one can see.
I love the look. Love the look.
Great.
So, all right. And Peter, how are you today?
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Cool. Okay. Well, to remind our viewers about what is strategic planning and why is it important for nonprofit organizations, I thought we'll start that question with you, Anne. Why is this so important? What is it about strategic planning?
So first of all, happy to be back talking about the thing that I love most about our role here at Fio. A lot of our work is strategic planning, and I think there is not a kind of work that I love more. Super geeky, super nonprofit consulting-y. But strategic planning is all about alignment. Strategic planning, people say it's a document, it's a little bit of research, it's, bringing in your client voices. But more importantly, it's about alignment of leaders of the organization, staff, and board having a very clear picture about the future that they'd like to move into and what are the steps to get there. We call it a lot of different things. It's a document, it's this, it's that. But most importantly, if it's done well, board and staff and even external community have a good sense of what an organization is trying to be in the world, what it's trying to achieve, and what are its priorities as it looks ahead. If I could rename strategic planning, I would call it strategic learning and choice making.
Oh, I love
that. It's called strategic planning, but it is really about an experience where leaders can get together and learn, make some choices, capture those choices, and then move forward. So it's really near and dear to my heart, and just happy to be back here and talking about it again.
Wow.
I love that reframing. I think The name strategic planning it kind of turns people off. Partly because I think it's sort of like evaluation. It has a tendency to create documents that don't get used.
Absolutely. It's either a binder or people have post-traumatic strategic planning disorder. Like they've done it and it's like, it's gone badly. Like it took a year and a half, or the consultant wasn't a good fit, or something went wrong in the middle. Like the executive director left, I mean, people have a lot of like anxiety and emotion when you start to say, oh my gosh, we need to do planning again.
Yeah.
Whether it's board or the executive director.
Right. And what for if I don't feel like we executed the last plan and
we didn't execute the last one. It didn't go well. We didn't use it. We spent a lot of money on it and nothing changed. Right. And so we really have to help people like take a big, giant, deep breath. Like, because if there were ever a moment to do planning, it's now. I have to say there's an enormous amount of demand right now as people are coming out of COVID to be like, what is this new world and how do we choose our path forward in this new context? So I think it's very relevant, particularly sort of 4 months after the last conversation, to really be thinking about how does that choice making unfold.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. And so why for some organizations, it's a document that gets put on a shelf versus for others, their work is transformed. What's the difference?
For me, it's about how did the document get created? So that's sort of the first piece. Is sort of did a bunch of leaders sort of just by themselves go off on a Saturday morning and write something down, and then they brought it back, and then everybody was confused as to like, well, why did we write that down and not something else? So first of all, it's about buy-in and engagement, kind of into what comes out of the process. And then the flip side of that is that someone's paying attention, that board and staff leadership agree that this is the work to be done, and that we're going to look at it periodically to help guide our priorities on a quarterly basis, on an annual basis. Someone has to care that the document was written and kind of hold it up at moments in time to say, are we making progress against these things? Yeah. If the document gets written and people either weren't included, don't understand it. I recently had a client that had a 220-page strategic plan. Mm-hmm. And staff were like, what are we supposed to do with this?
Yeah. How do we? Yeah.
They didn't even know how to operationalize it. And so, I mean, I think sometimes it's a true story, Sin. True's going through her head.
But I think not knowing how to operationalize it is very common, even if the plan isn't 200 pages long.
Yeah. A plan is 200 pages.
I know. And I was like, well, what's in it? Was it a magical novel?
Right.
Like haikus?
Step-by-step guide. Yeah.
And it's that people sometimes take, like, there is this misnomer about what is a strategy versus an operational plan versus a business plan versus a detailed work plan. Like, we have all these words that we throw around. And I think in the consulting space, like, it's not helpful to our clients to have all these different terms. Like, it's just not helpful. Yeah. And so when someone's embarking in strategic planning, my strategic plan could be somebody else's business plan. Somebody else's business plan is someone else's operating plan. I mean, it's a little ridiculous. And so, board and staff have to be really clear as they're undertaking planning. Like, what are we really talking about? Like, what are examples that we could look at? So I love when boards and an ED are sort of beginning to think about planning with a senior staff or a senior group to say, let's look at some other people's strategic plans. Like, let's look at some other organizations in our field. Let's look at some other organizations down the street. Who do we know that sort of recently finished one? So that they can get a flavor for sort of what are these things, this document, sort of what does it end up looking like in the world? What's included in it? What are the kinds of components that it might have? And in a lot of ways, which one kind of resonates with them as an organization? And it just helps like orienting people to be like, well, what are we actually creating that captures our strategic decisions that we may want to share with our community? It's a great way to get that conversation started with a board that maybe hasn't done planning yet, or is just beginning to dip their toe in it.
I love it. I love it. And so one of my pet peeves about strategic planning is that they heavily involve board members. And many times. And so sometimes board members are the most removed from the work. And if I were waving a flag, I would want that flag to be that the planning process should be staff led. Why are board members instrumental in the strategic planning process?
Well, I think, Cynthia, if I were to be really candid, I think this is something that the sector needs to really grapple with right now, which is who leads strategic planning, who's involved in planning, whose voices are at the table for decision making. I would absolutely agree with you that there's sort of a historical orientation. If you read any kind of like introduction to boards, like being responsible for the overarching strategy is something that a board should be cognizant of, should be responsible for. How a board lives that out, though, is really different. You know, you've seen one board involvement in strategic planning, you've seen one. And I think in many ways, the traditional model, which is a board level committee that drives the process, is hierarchical. To your point, it doesn't always involve staff and community members. And it's not in some ways what I'm typically sometimes recommending as we go forward. We need to have more inclusive participatory processes that include more voices. So sending board members off on a Saturday morning with some donuts and some good information isn't enough. You know, we've got to really be thinking about inclusion. And so I think I agree with you that kind of wholly board-driven strategic planning is too disconnected from both staff and community. And we really need to be thinking about it differently. You know, board members can play really supportive roles to planning. They can bring their expertise to the conversation. They can participate on a planning committee. They can be engaged and be curious and learn right alongside staff. But the wholly board only driven process is really not what I am certainly recommending to clients these days.
On the flip side, I think the staff can tend to be too close to the work.
It's true.
Right? You know, right? They're in it every day. It's hard to get out of that and think about other possibilities, right?
Yeah.
And that is what board might bring to it, right?
And so I love to see, PETA, committees that have a nice balance of board and staff. So 2 or 3, 4 board members, 2 or 3 staff members. And I'm really encouraging clients to try to be kind of bold and brave about who else is at that table. Yeah. Can they invite an external community partner? Can they invite a client or a participant? That's really readiness. And because in some ways you don't want an organization to do that if they don't have kind of the muscles of kind of inclusion, the ability to compensate those individuals for their contributions. There's kind of a lot that goes with that slightly bigger table. But I am encouraging people, be a little bold. Who should really be helping you make these choices? It doesn't always have to be a super internal, insular process. And then a lot of people are like, oh, we don't want people to see our dirty laundry. Well, if you have dirty laundry, like, let's deal with it and write a strategic plan that addresses it. You know,
right. You have another problem.
You have a different problem, right? But we can't be afraid to admit that, you know, our organizations aren't perfect.
Right.
They've made mistakes. Our organizations are evolving and changing, both in their work and in their context. And so being willing to bring in external voices into that leadership group in partnership with board members, I think is really powerful. Inviting other volunteers in. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that we can do with the leadership of these processes that would be more expansive and participatory going forward.
So Fio Partners is very, pushes organization or invites organizations. Organizations to think about bringing in other voices. How successful is that? Are nonprofits open to that? Or are we still having to work through some of those barriers?
I think it's a work in progress. And I mean, I think I have some really nice historical examples that are not recent. So libraries have huge opportunities to have very big planning committees. And so I ran a process maybe a decade ago that had 17 people on it, but it was 5 board members, 4 staff, 3 community members, 2 community partners. And it was just a bigger decision-making group. And so I think for clients now, and I think it's a combination of things, and I think it's COVID. I think it's virtual versus in person. I think there are barriers to participation. Cracking this nut around deeper participation of external kind of stakeholders in what is historically an internally driven process is definitively a work in progress. We've still got a lot of work to do for nonprofits to figure this out. But there are many examples where people are really running more community driven processes where actually the community is leading the strategic planning process or leading kind of an effort for which the nonprofit is a support to that process. And so it really depends. I've been in some circles and discussions on these issues, and people are like, well, of course we would do that. We've been doing that all the time, right? And so this nuance around kind of where is client voice, community voice, participant voice is very organization dependent. For some organizations, they have been doing it this way for 20 years. I think we have other organizations that have been super hierarchical and like the board just figures it out and then comes down from the mountain with a tablet and the staff is like, what are they thinking? But that's okay. I mean, I think there's a lot to unpack there, but I think it's a work in progress for sure.
It is demoralizing though as staff. Go ahead, Peter, because I can be.
So if I'm a board member and this conversation comes up, we're going to do planning. What kind of questions can I ask? Or, how can I contribute to this conversation to help build a productive process?
So part of it is understanding, even for that board member that's asking questions, how long have they been with the organization? So asking questions like, well, what was the last strategic planning process like? Who did we include? Did we actually use that document to guide our actions and behaviors? And if we didn't, why? So part of it is being a board member who's curious about the history of planning. And then I think it's about engaging fellow board members in a conversation that says, what do we not know? If we could rename the strategic learning, I would say, what do we not know today that we need to better understand to help make our choices for the future? And if we look at this as a learning journey, oftentimes board members will be like, I'm going to be honest, I don't actually know what this organization does.
I think that's actually really
be honest. Yeah.
It's really common. Yeah.
It's really common. Be like, I got invited here. I was in a meeting the other day where a board member, I was like, well, why are you here? I got invited by that guy next to me. He's my friend. And so he invited me to be on this board. No, I'm not. Nope. I don't know anything about this cause. I'm not interested really, but I really like him. Yeah. And so that's why I'm here. And you're like, okay, let's work with that. So you have to acknowledge that board members are on boards for so many different reasons that what they can do is encourage each other to be curious. Like if we're going to write a strategic plan, what do I need to know as a board member to be helpful, to have an opinion? And so how do we create that context for people to not be afraid, to be curious, to not rush these processes? Like if I could just say to board members, anyone who thinks that you should do strategic planning in less than 90 days, and it should be super participatory, like, please, let's not do that. I've had some clients where we've tried to do that and it doesn't go well. And so we have to realize that if we want processes that include staff, that include board, that include community voice, they don't happen quickly and they shouldn't happen quickly.
No, one of the things that I've seen a lot is when you're talking about strategic planning, when you're talking about any kind of planning process, the staff, hang on, I'm going to close my door. Talk amongst yourselves.
Yes. Peter's always joining us.
Well, I
That,
mean,
that must be the mail carrier.
it's a
Yeah, it
great
was probably
metaphor for
Yeah.
strategic planning. Like sometimes you just have to stop the
This
process.
is just, this is how the process goes. Some of my participants are feeling anxious about this process.
Yes, clearly.
You know, for the staff, your staff in not-for-profits are really, really close to the work, right? And the work is usually real people that they feel very strongly about, and they're very connected to it. And when you're thinking about doing a planning process and you're saying, like, there are potentially big shifts here, there are programs that could shut down. There are lines of activity that we might not do anymore. There are potentially groups of people that could be excluded from getting our services. From the perspective of the staff, this kind of conversation is really scary, right? It's really threatening. It's really threatening to the communities that they built, the relationships that they built, and their jobs, right? And their identities and their jobs. And I think for all of those reasons, it's got to be a really slow process, right? The board and the leadership that want to make really big sweeping decisions, and that's great, right? And they really should, but they need to do it in a way that's sensitive to how scary it's going to be for some people.
And increasingly, I mean, I really want organizations, both board and staff, to be so much bolder about inclusion of staff and decision making at all levels, about providing voice around bringing people along in what they're learning in the process. I mean, the worst thing that you can do is launch a strategic plan that has a program closure and no one has heard about it.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, what should be happening is, you know, we've done some learning about the outcomes of a particular program. We've learned that there's 2 or 3 competitor programs that have opened on the same road. That we've learned that, you know, our program really struggles because we have different funding sources. And so we can't offer the same thing. You know, staff are not stupid. They know. They're living it every day. They're running an under-resourced program that may not be working, and they're in it. And they, in some ways, it's sort of like, how do we treat them with the dignity and respect that this is information that they can handle? I mean, that they can learn in partnership about their own.
And how do we frame it that the best way to meet our mission in this area is not necessarily to run our own program? That doesn't mean it's not important. It just means this is not the right way for us to serve it.
Yeah, and in so many ways, we can do, I think the other really powerful thing about planning, and it is about learning, and it is about choosing, you know, but there are also moments in the process where that learning raises up alternate perspectives. You know, it raises up the ability to reframe something. We're not going to stop doing this. We're going to actually refer our clients to a stronger program down the street that's better for them. And what we're going to do is still this ancillary piece of it that's a complementary service, right? So teaching staff about program quality and evaluation, teaching staff about kind of the ecosystem of services that their clients may be taking advantage of, to say, listen, we're in the ecosystem. We're not the strongest player on that front. Here's what we're really good at. Let's double down on our resources there versus being stretched so thin. So I think there's so much learning that can happen when we engage staff actually in that way, to have those discussions, to talk amongst themselves about what's working really well for my program, what's kind of thinking about what are the trends for the future of this program. You know, I'm going to admit this program maybe isn't awesome, you know, or other programs are like, this is the best thing. There's no one else that does it as good as we do. And we are really good at it. And we should grow and expand this program. You know, staff on the front line are the ones that can have those discussions and bring those perspectives into the strategic planning process. You know, we use a tool at Fio called a program profile, where staff fill that out. That is a team building activity for staff. And then board members read it and they're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that we did all these things. This is amazing. This is super helpful.
I mean, I see that a lot, where there's a like, hurry up and inform the board about what you're doing. Yes. Right. And sometimes it's just all the time. Like every board meeting will have a staff presentation on what we do, but not necessarily to a particular end, right? Not necessarily so that we can have strategic discussions about how to do that better.
Yes.
and it's activity focused. This is always my concern as an evaluator. We're talking about the activities that we're doing, not how it connects to our mission, right? Not the outcomes and the impact that we're having.
Right. Or tying being able to have every programmatic discussion anchored in and this is how this drives our impact. Our big picture goal is this, and this is how this program fits in. As organizations grow, the other thing that happens is that they add lots of programs and services. So that connection to impact becomes more and more opaque. And I think planning, the other piece that I say about planning is that it is about learning. It's about choosing. It's about a board understanding the future of the organization's work. So when we're choosing this impact, right? We're choosing the big picture thing that we're driving towards. We're then choosing, how does the work of this organization need to change to continue to move towards that impact? And so that question about the future of the work, and Peta, we're going to geek out on this, but like, I love a good logic model. I love a good theory of change. Here's our work today, and here's how it's changing for the future, right? And so there's a bunch of different tools we use in the sector to have those conversations. But boards have to understand that. Like, so when we're talking about strategy, what are we really talking about? It's learning enough to sort of choose what the future work is of this organization. And then as a board member, it's then how does our job have to change? So one of the biggest things that I think we miss sometimes in planning is the board are like, this is a staff thing. You all figure out the future of the work. Then you tell us what you want to do. That's cool. When in fact, the board has to be incredibly reflective around, if this is the future of this organization's work, what does that mean for us? What's our job? How are we contributing to moving this forward? Does this mean we have to fundraise more? Does this mean we need to be better brand ambassadors?
Resources or connection do we bring or do we not bring?
Or do we need to participate? One of the greatest retreats we ran recently, the board was like, wow, we really need to do more state level advocacy work. We really need to be in the state house having conversations with our legislators on these issues, and the staff can't do it alone. And we've got to bring our experience and gravitas to that conversation. So all of a sudden you're in the planning retreat talking about strategy, which is actually impacting systems. And you have a board realizing, oh my gosh, advocacy is something we can help with. Like, very exciting.
I love it. I have just two more questions. We're over time. We could talk to you forever, really. And so I see the passion. But what happens when a ED cannot get her board to say yes to a strategic planning process?
I think you got to take the board where they are. So you got to ask why. Why won't we do planning? Why aren't you excited about it? I think I can sell strategic planning to anyone. I think it's the coolest thing you can do ever as an organization. It's about learning. It's about choosing. It's about engaging people. It is a great team building effort. And so the big question becomes, if we have a board that's sort of like, I'm not so sure we want to do planning. The question is why. So being really curious as an executive director, say, why doesn't my board want to do this? And if they need to, lead it out of the staff and figure out a way for one or two board members to be involved. Take the coalition of the willing. Sometimes it's not everybody. If you can get a couple of board members to be engaged, that'll usually at least connect the work to the board. I don't think you should do it without any board involvement at all, because then they really won't help you. But I think if we can get one or two ambassadors involved at a minimum, like that can work out well.
I love that. Thank you for that. And then my final question is, what are some signs that you need a strategic plan?
That you can't make any decisions. So if you are stuck, like you don't know if you should buy the building or sell the building. You don't know if you should add a program or delete a program. You're not sure kind of what's the future of your work and if your work is relevant anymore. If you're really struggling with kind of a decision, strategic planning is a great way to sort of level set. Where are we as an organization? And get that bigger picture figured out, because whether or not you own the building, buy the building, lease the building, buy the building down the street, is 100% tied to what you're trying to do and the future of your work. So if the future of your work is unclear, you cannot decide anything because all of these things are interconnected. So my recommendation would be is, when you need to plan, when you go to your board and you say, should we do this or not? And everybody sort of looks around the table and goes, I don't know. What do you think?
Right. Or is giving responses out of completely different frames, right?
Yeah.
Or, responding out of a financial frame or a, ethical frame, but not a mission frame.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Then you said it in the beginning. This is about alignment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Love that.
Yes, it is.
Wow.
It is.
Thank you so much, Anne. As always, we so enjoy you. We love to see how your eyes light up when you talk about strategic planning. Anybody who's not watching, you're missing out on eyes.
Yeah.
I'm always happy to come. Thank you for having me, guys.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for watching and listening, and we'll see you next week. Bye.